It was about 10 years ago when the long and warm end of October turned out. There were warm and sunny days over the forests of the Skov region. And although the trees had shed their leaves and the air was cold in the morning, nature seemed to slow down, and by noon the bright sun warmed everything around. Migratory birds flying to the south decided to make a halt in the Skov region and feed on countless channels and lakes full of fish and wildlife. The wolves became bolder and united, making raids on individual flocks of forest roe deer and elk with their grown-up families. It so happened that on that October evening, a large group of hunters gathered on the channel of the Izva River, beyond which a string of large and small Ostiansk lakes and dams opened. Among the motley audience were strong village men and city visitors in new imported ammunition and with foreign guns. Among them, a certain Nikolai Potemkin stood out, along with whom his guests arrived in a jeep. There were rumors that he was the director of the regional trade, and his two guests had some kind of power immunity from any traffic cop or hunting huntsman. So they were busily sorting through their ammunition and smacking their tongues about decoy diving ducks that are not afraid of fractions and look like real ones. "I just want to give them names," said one of them in a suede jumpsuit and a hunting cap with feathers on the side. Maybe Klosher and Stesher. Ha ha, another aged and grey-haired city man dressed in black leather picked up. "Mitrich, do you want to give them the names of your secretaries? Ha ha. It's all empty, with decoys. My 3-barrel saw 12 caliber will mow down half 100 with the 5th shot." The director smoked a pipe. "I love to lure them with Swiss monkeys on the moonwalk. They go crazy from them and come from all over the neighborhood. Just don't yawn and shoot." The sun went down below the horizon, and dusk began to thicken over the bayou. An owl hooted in the forest, and a piercing cold wind blew from the north. The breeze blew out, as if the ducks and capercaillies did not move from these places. "Then goodbye hunting," said the huntsman Sashka, who looked after everything here and was ready to prohibit any shooting of game. The hunters had not bought licenses. "Sanek, you're the best shooter here. How are you going to shoot birds, or a boar?" Asked the village peasant, called Baldy. "And at least as I can." The huntsman stretched and closed his eyes. "Oh, I'm tired, brothers. Last night I did everything. I chased poachers through the forest." "Well, how's Sanek? Did he catch you? Will they give you the order now?" "So, they left. They dumped the boar meat, but the bastards on the fuel truck left. However, I copied their numbers. It will be for them now." Further, according to the traditions of the forest overnight, the men began to warm themselves not with a fire, but with hot drinks, and began to tell endless hunting tales about shot boars, the size of wild boars, wolves with fangs like vampires, and moose with horns like a walnut bush. A lot of stories were poisoned, and if there was truth somewhere, it was half overheard by someone once, but that happened many years ago. And there was one among all the hunters whom the peasants called Petrovich, the quietest and most docile man in terms of collecting firewood for a fire and cooking porridge with boar stew. He just kept silent and held a large pine bow near him. Everyone ate rich buckwheat porridge, praising Petrovich, and clicked their tongues, saying how delicious and savory it turned out, incomparable with any delicacies or sausages. "Petrovich, did you take a bow with you, or didn't your other half send you off with a shotgun?" One of the city's visiting hunters asked the man. "So we can give you a gun for hunting. Do you have a hunting jacket?" Petrovich was silent for a long time, and then pushed his hat to the back of his head and wiped the sweat on his forehead. "Thank you, but I don't have a wife or a gun." "So, Petrovich, have I heard that you are from the Siberian tiger itself, from the Krasnoyarsk territory?" There was a voice from the hunting circle of the surprised man. "I was going to ask you about the onion, too, but they beat me to it." Petrovich was silent for another 5 minutes, and then, taking a sip of someone's proffered steel glass, he grunted and spoke, as if freeing his soul. He was born in the Krasnoyarsk territory, where from a young age his father took him hunting wolves, raisins and bears. From there, he was drafted into the army, served an urgent and 5 years on a long-term basis in the Caucasus Mountains, in the hottest spots. And when he returned to his land, his father was once picked up by a bear, so much so that he did not live a month. And Petrovich had no choice but to work as a fur tradesman and a predatory beast. Soon he got married, and his daughter was born, so he did not grieve, and no matter what, but somehow he went with 2 henchmen to the mines. His friends hunted for gold bars, on one of the Siberian rivers, where gold was washed 100 years ago. Sometimes the rock was opened after the ice melt and landslides, and small nuggets sparkled in it. They were looking for gold, and he was shooting provisions and harvesting furs. So a month passed, and they began to get ready to go home, began to keep away down the river on a motorboat. And just before the NSA, they decided to spend the night in the bayou. Having stretched a canvas awning, they set up camp. Petrovich laid out the harvested furs to dry. The friends were afraid to move away from the boat and were on guard. They were afraid that gold could attract dashing people. They kept their guns ready. And now, when it was getting dark and they were going to rest, and Petrovich decided to check the fishing donks and pike gillets thrown on the taimen, there was a crack in the forest, as if a large dry tree was falling. They all became alert and began to watch the forest. Suddenly, some large creature the size of a man swept through the dark forest, but the light of the moon managed to illuminate it. Petrovich paused and sighed heavily, as if his long-standing wound had begun to sting and hurt him again. The feeling was that this creature could not be human, since it was so fast and made such big jumps. Everyone around Petrovich around the campfire just opened their mouths and listened intently, not following the usual village practice of asking something again or inserting their remarks and explanations. Two friends had rifled carbines, and they decided that someone had come to them for gold. They lost their minds and started shooting aimlessly and offhand at any rustle. They fired until there was a scream and an inhuman groan. Petrovich was silent for about 5 minutes, and then silently knocked over a glass of vodka handed to him by someone. And then, after drinking, crossed himself and looked back to the forest, from where the owl hooted Iria for the umpteenth time, and was immediately answered by an owl, whistling, penetrating into the very depths of a human soul. When we ran up to him, we realized that it was not a man, although it looked similar in shape, except that thick fur covered his body. It was still alive, but it was dying, and as if children's sobs and moans were heard. Then it died, and Petrovich's friend did the most irreparable thing. He took out a knife and cut off his ear, a trophy for scientists. They say they will pay more for it than for gold, so he said. Petrovich choked, and then began to tell in a patter that suddenly there was a ferocious click in the forest, as if some huge predatory animal was screaming, and then the cracking of broken branches. They understood everything and ran to the riverbank, where they had a boat in the backwater. They were lucky that the engine started the first time, and they threw everything that was at hand into the boat, blew up the silence with a roar, quickly leaving along the water rapids. After moving a few hundred meters away from the pool, they ventured to look back and look back. On the shore, in the light of the moon, they clearly saw a huge humanoid creature with black fur, at least 3 meters tall. It raged and broke branches and trees. They drove along the river for several hours in the direction of the Yenisei until they swam out and went, turning on the second engine, changing tacks and making their way against the current towards their village. Only in the morning, having moved 50 kilometers away from the channel, they took a little breath and sailed to their village. One of the friends was arrested for gold a couple of days later when he went to the city and was imprisoned. But his wife and child disappeared in the forest not more than a month later, where they went to pick berry. And his second partner burned down in the house with his old mother, and they say that before the fire, heart-rending screams were heard from the house, as if someone was being tortured there. Petrovich told his wife everything, and she no longer hesitated, decided to move to her mother in Irkutsk, and with Petrovich she filed for divorce, and pointed out to him all 4 sides. So he came to these parts in the Pskov region, where he inherited a house from his aunt and uncle. After Petrovich's story, everyone was quiet for a while, as if thinking about something. Someone grunted and crossed himself imperceptibly. Suddenly, at the edge of the forest, which was no further than 100 meters from them, branches cracked, and in the light of the moon, they clearly saw a huge boar cleaver. A meter high and weighing more than 200 kilograms, he looked at people and was not at all afraid of them, as if his size gave him the right to do so. Large upturned fangs looked out of its mouth, and the cleaver's fur sparkled in the light of the moon. Mitrich, shoot from your saw, shouted a grey-haired man in a black leather jacket. But no one moved, and everyone continued to stare at the boar in fascination. The beast stood for a while, and then, slowly turning around, seemed to disappear into the forest. And in the morning, suddenly all the hunters agreed that if the north wind blew, popularly called Severok, then they would not hunt, and they had to return home.